Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me for this segment, we have Ryan McCormack, Core and Factor Equity Strategist at Invesco, to discuss weekly performance in the Nasdaq-100. We'll also take a look at NVDA versus Marvell versus SPY versus QQQ. Ryan, it's great to see you as always. Big week for you. You have Jackson Hole you're paying attention to. Of course, we have NVIDIA after the close, right, which could be one of the most important earnings that we've seen this year. We'll get to that in a moment. But what did you notice? What trends? What were you focused on this week in terms of Nasdaq 100 performance?
Yeah, so looking at our Nasdaq 100 tracking vehicles, QQQ and QQQM, we were both down by 82 basis points. They outperformed the S&P 500 down just over 1%, and the S&P 500 Value Index down a little over 1.8%. Would have been worse if it were not for Monday's performance, where we saw QQQ jumping by 1.6% and S&P 500 up over nearly 70 basis points, which ended a 4-day losing streak. And this is despite on Monday the 10-year Treasury yield touching 4.35%, which is the highest level that we've seen since November 2007, as the markets seem to be positioning for higher rates for longer. To your point, right, beyond NVIDIA's earnings announcement tonight, the market attention is clearly on Fed Chairman Powell's speech from Jackson Hole on Friday. Last year, we saw CPI reading over 6%. The Fed had undergone 3 consecutive 75 basis points hikes, and the target rate was at 2.25% to 2.5%. And Powell noted that they were going to keep at it until they were confident that the job is done. So we look over the past year, they kept at it. The target rate is 5.25% to 5.5%, and July CPI at 3.2%. But there's a lot of debate as to whether or not the job is actually done. Really, whether the cumulative effect of their tightening policy has fully worked itself into the economy, and if ultimately it's going to drive inflation down to their 2% long-term target. During the trading session, during last year's speech, we saw S&P 500 and Nasdaq 100 falling by both over 2%. So we'll be interesting to see what Friday brings.
And of course, we're talking about risk concentration in the market and widening breadth, right? So when we take a look at sector performance, what was leading the way? Are you starting to see that widen out a bit?
Yeah, we've been seeing it sort of, over the past couple of weeks. I mean, this particular week, we saw technology lead relative performance against SPY. Communication services weighed on performance. Lots of red in the sector, mainly Meta platforms down nearly 5%. But from an individual company news perspective, Palo Alto Networks helped drive the tech sector. It was up by over 8% this week, fueled by nearly 15% jump on Monday after the company reported earnings on Friday. Comparable EPS beat estimates, billings for the fiscal year beat estimates at almost $11 billion. But the stock was under pressure earlier in the month after participants noted that the announcement was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. So led to a lot of speculation of bad news, but the company ultimately just pointed to scheduling issues around a conference for Sunday. We also saw Moderna up over 20% for the week. The company signed a deal with China's CareGen around potential new cancer vaccines. And then last week, they also announced that early studies for their new COVID booster was effective against the new strains of the virus. And, we've seen infection rates and hospitalizations due to COVID cases increase with these new strains. And then, of course, Monday brought an added bump after the White House discussed a campaign for the fall, encouraging people to get vaccine boosters. But it's been a tough 2023 for Moderna. It was down over 46% through last week, the 15th.
All right. Well, after the close, of course, everyone's anticipating NVIDIA and their earnings announcement. If we take a look at this next chart here, NVIDIA versus Marvell, another chip maker versus S&P versus Accuse. I mean, the performance is quite glaring here.
And that's really what we're trying to show, right? And you and I, for the past, number of weeks, we've talked about NVIDIA's earnings being a really important one, right? Today was a day that we had circled on the calendar. And, over the past week, NVIDIA was the largest contributor to tech relative outperformance, but that's some up and down trading, right? Positioning ahead of this earnings announcement. It was up almost 8.5% on Monday, down almost 3% yesterday, up today about 2.1% as of about 20 minutes ago. And all told, over the week, it was up just under 4%. Ultimately, we need to see what the revenue looks like versus the previous guidance. And certainly any guidance going forward is going to be a big focal point. I mean, the company has essentially turned into the AI bellwether for the market. And, I want to make mention, it's not quite the same fanfare as NVIDIA, but Marvell Tech is reporting earnings tomorrow night after the close. And much like NVIDIA in their last round of earnings in May, they noted that AI revenue is going to double in fiscal 2024 and will continue to grow rapidly. That stock was up over 32% following its announcement in May. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch as well. And according to that chart, both have performed exceptionally well. NVIDIA is up a blistering 212% this year. Marvell Tech over 61.5%, and both outpacing QQQ and the S&P 500 year to date.
Yeah, I mean, the options market is pricing in, I believe it's an 11% move, either to the up or downside in NVIDIA. I mean, it's not surprising to see all the positioning happening ahead of the print.
No, definitely not. I mean, I think it was just such an outsized revenue forecast last quarter. And then, you look over the past week, we talked about it last week, we saw a number of different analysts coming in and upgrading price targets or pointing to strong momentum and sort of hand-wringing around the numbers. So, obviously all eyes are on NVIDIA tonight after the close.
All right, Ryan, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.